Shalom everyone, I'm Ryan White, Rooted in Torah Ministries, and this week we're going over the Torah portion, Tetze, which is Deuteronomy 21 verse 10 through 25 verse 19. And this, I'll tell you, this Torah portion is honestly packed with a lot of stuff that I would just love to discuss, and unfortunately, we're kind of limited in time here, so if you want more information on a lot of these different subjects, please check out my website, rootedintorah.com. And we've got a lot of material covering a lot of these concepts here. So what I really want to do this week is just kind of run through some of this stuff and give you guys a kind of a taste and an overview, and hopefully you'll be able to dig into some resources and really check out some of the amazing stuff in this week's Torah portion. So let's begin by blessing our Creator who has blessed us with this week's Torah portion. Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvarak, Baruch Adonai Hamvarak le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim ve'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah. Amen and amen. All right, so the first thing we want to look at is, I'm going to actually go to Deuteronomy 21 verse 18, and this is the Torah portion, or the Torah, or the commandments, should I say, dealing with the rebellious son. And this, for a lot of people, has been a point of hardship of getting over, because it's essentially telling you that you have the legal right to kill your son. And so, again, these Bible critics will bring this verse up, and they'll say, every time your son does something wrong, are you just going to kill him? Because that's what the Bible says. Let's just read it, and the context should become immediately clear what's going on here. He says, if any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother, and this is where they generally just kind of start, their eyes glaze over, and when they chastise him, he will not listen. Then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of the city who are at the gateway of his hometown. And they shall say to the elders, look at what he says here. This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Okay. So the context, first off, isn't just that you can have your children put to death whenever they disobey you. Very clearly, as we talked about last week, this is within the context of a legal system. In Israel, the elders at the city gate, that was essentially the court. If we go and it's actually really good, if you go to Israel, you can actually see that the city gates, it wasn't just like a single gate like we would think of. It's a long area, and there's little rooms off to each side of that area, and those were areas where they would hold court and various things. And you can actually see this, for example, if you go to Israel and you go to Tel Dan, that's one place specifically that comes to mind. You can see this idea of the city gates and the areas there where they would hold court at, and that's where the elders of the city are holding court, right? So this is a legal case that you're not just putting your son to death, you're taking him to the court. And notice the words there. He is a glutton and a drunkard, which would imply we're not talking about your 10-year-old son who isn't taking out the trash when you tell him to. We're talking about a grown adult man still living with his parents who is stubborn, rebellious, won't obey, is a glutton and a drunkard. And notice both the mother and the father must agree with this. It's not just one or the other. And you got to think about this. Who wants to kill their kid? I mean, this is a pretty serious thing. If a mother and a father have decided that there's something wrong and their son needs to be put to death, they're doing it because they want to protect people from him. You think about the people today who, their 17-year-old kid or 19-year-old kid that lives at home with them or whatever, goes and takes their gun and goes out to the school and shoots up the school over this. Things like this. This is what we're talking, this is the sort of child we're talking about, is someone who the parents recognize as a danger to society, and so they're going to put him to death. Okay, let's move along now to Deuteronomy chapter 22. This is one of those very interesting chapters that has something that we oftentimes are going to miss when we're just reading the English because of the way that the English translation goes. I want to turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 9. And it seems pretty straightforward. It says, "You shall sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, and all the produce of the seed which you have sown," you shall not, yeah. So if you sow your field with two types of seed, all of the seed which you have sown and the increase in the vineyard shall become defiled. That seems pretty straightforward, but you can see there that I highlighted the word defiled. So when you look at this, you can see this on the other side too. The Hebrew word there is tikdash, which is the feminine call imperfect form of the word kadosh. The root word there is kadosh. So it's saying not that it will become defiled, but that it will become holy. That's what the word kadosh means. Now, of course, the translators, when they got to that, they're like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so they translated it as the term defiled. And this is a lot of times a problem with translators and translations. And I mean, these things it's not like there's just, the translations are all just terrible. But it's little minor things like this that kind of just shows us that the translator who was working on this, translating it from the Hebrew into the English, did not understand the concept of holiness and mixtures within the Bible. This is one of those times where, and by the way, when we look at this word, we could do a Bible word study on this word kadosh, and you'll see that translating it as, and I'll just put this up here on the screen so you can see this here. This is using Logos Bible software. You can see from this is the HAL, that is the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Bible. That's one of the premier lexicons. It's the top one out there that scholars use. Holy, removed from common use, subject to special treatment, forfeit to the sanctuary. This one right here, this term is very important for us to understand. And as you can, let's go up here a little bit. As you can see, the frequency, it's generally translated as consecrate, consecrated, sanctified, holy. You'll notice that it pretty much, in fact, I think this is the only place in this verse where it is translated as defiled, And so that to really understand what that means, we've got to go, this is the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Bible, and right here is where we're really going to understand this, because this word can have different meanings depending on how it's used. And actually, you can see here it's actually defining this. The product of a vineyard sown with two kinds of seed is forfeit to the sanctuary. That's the concept going on here. It's not that it's defiled and evil, it's that it is, because it's two kinds of mixed seeds, and this is where the study of what holiness is and who is allowed to deal with it. You see, only the priests are allowed to deal with matters of holiness. That's their assigned role. And so that mixture becomes forfeit to the sanctuary. Why? Because it's mixed and it's the realm for priests to deal with. Priests deal in a matter of mixtures. This is why, and you can see this a couple verses down here. Let's put this back up on the screen. It says, "You shall not plow the ox with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear materials of mixed wool and linen together." Now, the issue with this is, because we go, oh, okay, well, we can't wear mixtures. The problem is that the priests themselves wear a mixture. You see, we know this based on archaeological research. They could not dye wool blue. The only thing that would dye they could not dye linen blue. Sorry, I mixed that up. Linen, with the types of dye that they use and the type of linen that we found actual garments from back then in the Dead Sea community and elsewhere. Whenever they would try to dye it blue, it would run, the ink would just run off of it. And so only wool could be dyed blue. And so when the priests would wear their wool, they're blue and white garments. They're made out of linen, white linen, and blue wool. Now, this right here says you can't do that, but that's because they understood this, again, within the system of holiness in the Bible. This is why it's so important for us to point out that this word defiled is actually holy or sanctified, that the vineyard becomes holy or sanctified, not defiled. This mixture then belongs to the priests. And so this is why the priests can wear these mixed garments. And if you notice, the high priest himself, he wears garments of even higher mixture. Not only does he wear the blue and the white, but he adds in gold as well. So the higher level of holiness, the more of this mixture of garments that they can have. Does that make sense to you? Okay, I know it's a little bit different, but if you're really interested in that, there is a really great book. And in fact, if you go to the resources section on my website, I have a link to it. You can read the book in PDF for free. And the book is called Graded Holiness by Philip Peter Jensen. And he goes way in depth into the Hebrew in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy to really explain this concept in depth, this idea of different levels of holiness and what holiness really entails and what it's all about. All right, let's moving along here. I want to go down, and we're just gonna kind of jump around here in this Torah portion because there's so much stuff. I really just want to. I'd love to spend 2 hours on this, but we're always limited for time, and so we're just going to kind of jump to several different things here that aren't necessarily related. The next one I want to look at is this law concerning a woman who is not a virgin who's seized. And oftentimes this is, again, another law that is looked down upon by critics of the Bible because they say, oh, well, see, the Bible is immoral. It says that if a man rapes a woman, that she just has to marry him. How terrible of her, or of Moses in the Bible. How could he do this? How could God require a rape victim to marry her rapist? Well, let's discuss this for a second, because a lot of times we don't really fully understand what would go on in this culture. Okay, in the biblical culture, in the culture of the ancient Near Eastern world, if a woman was raped, people wouldn't want to marry. They wanted to marry virgins. Okay, and so a woman who's raped more than likely is not going to find a husband. And so she's going to be left fending for herself, essentially. These women that this would happen to, oftentimes, either they would continue to live with their father in their father's household until they died, or if their father wasn't wealthy enough to support them, a lot of times they would end up working as a prostitute or something in these other nations. And so God creates a way to protect these women. And let's read it here in this text, okay? Deuteronomy 22, verse 28. If a man finds a girl who is a virgin, who is not engaged, and seizes her and lies with her, and they are discovered, then the man who lay with her shall give the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, that's the bride price, and she shall become his wife because he violated her. He cannot divorce her all of his days. Okay, so think about this scenario. Let's first off, let's assume this is rape. We're going to talk about why it probably is actually not talking about violent rape in a minute, but let's assume this was a forced rape. Okay, he's required to marry her, which means this rapist is now required to provide for her, to provide her food and clothing and everything like that, all the days of her life, or all the days of his life, I guess, specifically. Maybe he'll want to kill himself after she makes, his life not so fun. He can't divorce her. He must provide for her because he did this. And so, while feelings, when we think about feelings, that's a terrible that you're forced to do this. But at the same time, it's forcing him to take responsibility and actually take care of him. It never says that she ever has to sleep with him again. It never says that she can't burn his bread, that she can't make his life miserable because of what he did. But now he is still required to provide for her. And so we see the wisdom of God there in worrying more about providing for and protecting this young woman who was taken advantage of, rather than punishing. And really that is punishment, because now he can't marry anyone else, and he has to provide for her the rest of his life. Rather than, in our system, what do? Maybe they throw this guy in jail for a year. So this guy's in jail, this young woman was raped. What good does that do her that he's in jail? Aside from him being off the streets for a year until he gets out and probably does it again to someone else, now she is left damaged. She's left in anguish. I mean, this is very, but we look at the women who've been raped. That's very traumatic for them. A lot of them have difficulties throughout the rest of their life because of what this person did. And what God does is he creates a system where the woman is taken care of. And so who are we really to criticize that when God is actually looking out for the well-being? Now, we could also, though, look at this, and the thing is that we take this word seize. The word in Hebrew is tefas, and we assume that means some sort of a violent, violent seizure, a forced sexual rape. But if you look at the text here, let's put this back up here on the screen. It says, and he lies with her, and they are discovered. They being in the plural, right? Which means which would then imply what? That implies that both of them were complicit in this act. This idea of seizing, while we think of it as a violent term, this word seize doesn't necessarily mean seize within the concept of violent rape. It still is a rape, but more along, and this is what I propose, this is what I talked about in my thesis, where I covered this. What is going on here, most likely, is actually consensual sexual relationship between the couple, but outside of the bounds of marriage and without the father's knowledge. It's not that he's seizing her in a violent action, but he's seizing her from her father. It's what we call statutory rape, right? In our country today, minors, and I think it varies in state to state, maybe, I don't know, but 16 seems to be about the legal age, 16 or 18, whatever it is. Under that age, they are considered a minor, and they don't have the legal right to make the choice to have sexual relationship with someone older. So if a 30-year-old man goes and has consensual sex with a 14-year-old girl, our legal system says, no, that is not consensual, because she does not have the legal right of consent due to her age. Does that make sense to you? Okay. In Israelite society, a woman, even if she's over 18, if she's still living in her father's house and is not married to someone, she does not have the legal right of consent. This is, for example, Dinah and Shechem. The story of Dinah and Shechem, where supposedly Shechem rapes Dinah. When we read the story again, it's more than likely that Shechem didn't actually seize Dinah and rape her in that sense. More than likely, it was consensual, but she is not of the legal ability to give that consent because she is still her father's daughter. That's how their system worked. And so ultimately what's going on here is really that this statutory rapist, shall we really call him, is actually seizing the rights of the father to his daughter. Not that the father would be doing that with his daughter, but the father has the right to control who she marries, who she sleeps with. And obviously the daughter's going to have input in it, but that's the way that the society worked back then, is that he is her legal guardian until he transfers that to her husband, right? And so if this person does this, what is he ultimately doing? He's ultimately bringing shame upon her father, because her father is now basically a public statement that her father couldn't protect her, and it's a public statement of shame upon her. I mean, and this is the same thing today. You know, these young men who go out and they sleep with all these women that they're not married to. Do they really have respect for that woman? If you have respect for a woman, aren't you going to, if you actually love her and respect her, aren't you going to put a ring on her finger, get actually married, and state before witnesses your loving commitment to her in a marriage ceremony? Premarital sex shows that you have contempt, essentially, for that woman. Oh, you may have these feelings for her, but you don't really respect her as an honorable woman when you do that. Our God is protecting the honor of the woman and the honor of her family, who's supposed to have raised her to be a good, virtuous woman who wouldn't be doing this to begin with. So, as you can see here, there's a lot more going on behind the stories with these words, and we really got to go and put ourselves in that culture and context to really understand just the love and the commitment of our Creator for us, that He is always looking out for our best interests and the best interests of those who society would tend to marginalize, who would tend to take advantage of them. Most societies will take advantage of women because physically women are, generally weaker than men. And so societies tend to marginalize and take advantage of women. You look at a lot of the cultures in the Arab countries today and in Islamic cultures, and a lot of times the women are subjected. And even if they love the person because they had relationships with someone who the family didn't approve of, they'll go out and they'll kill that woman. The Torah doesn't demand killing that woman. It demands what? That the man who did that now must provide for her. Okay, let's move on. This is probably one of my favorite ones to discuss. We're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 24. Not my favorite because I approve of in any way, shape, or form divorce, but just because this is such a misunderstood statement here. And I think we're probably going to finish up with this for this week's Torah portion. So let's read Deuteronomy chapter 24, and then we'll look into what is it actually discussing, what does it actually mean? Because this is, of course, this divorce is a very touchy subject, and it's something that Yeshua was questioned on, and he brought a ruling that will make sense when we properly understand what's going on here. Okay, so Deuteronomy chapter 24. When a man takes a wife and marries her, it happens that she has found no favor in his eyes because he found some matter of indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out from his house. When she leaves his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband turns against her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out, or if the latter husband dies who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her again to be his wife, since she has been defiled. For it is an abomination before the Lord. And by the way, that word defiled there is not kadosh, it's tameh. For it is an abomination before the Lord. You shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Okay, look at the words there. You shall not bring sin upon the land. Let me ask you a question. How is remarrying your ex-wife bringing sin on the land? This is where we got to go in and we've got to understand culture and context. So let's look at the two husbands here. The first husband, it says that she found no favor in his eyes because of a matter of indecency. Probably, and there was a huge discussion between the Pharisees, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. They were arguing of it. Some of them said, this is talking about sexual infidelity. This is talking about adultery. The other house said, no, this is a matter or an indecency, and so even if she burnt the bread, he can divorce her. Yeshua clearly says matter of indecent. We're talking about adultery here, and hopefully all of us can agree that we're talking about some sort of a matter of adultery here. So if a man divorces his wife over adultery or some sort of lewd, indecent act, in that culture, the man would retain the dowry. Now, the dowry, what the dowry is it is given by the father of the bride at the wedding to the couple. And generally, this is her portion of the inheritance. It's not her legal right, like it is the legal right of sons, but the father would give part of the land, part of his wealth as dowry to the bride and groom. And it stays within the family control. If there's a divorce, though, and this is key, if she is at fault through a matter of adultery, she loses the dowry and the man keeps it. We can verify this with a lot of different documents from the ancient Near East. And there's a really great book on this if you want to read on it. It's called Marriage and Divorce, Divorce and Remarriage in the Bible by David Instone Brewer. Excellent book. And he goes through and he shows all the examples of where we know that this is the case, that if she commits adultery, the man keeps the dowry. However, if the man dies, or if he divorces her for a non-just reason, she didn't commit adultery, then she would keep the dowry. Now, this is key because when we look at the second husband, it says the latter husband turns against her. Literally in the Hebrew, it says that he hates her. Now, this term hates her, this scholar David Instone Brewer has shown that this is talking about a divorce where he just doesn't like her anymore. She didn't do anything wrong. He doesn't like her. So we've got either he divorces her because he just doesn't like her, or if the latter husband dies who took her to be his wife. Let me ask you a question. In both of those scenarios, what do they have in common? The bride keeps the dowry. Then the former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her as wife again. Why? Because he has the dowry from their original marriage, and now she has a dowry from that second marriage. Are you catching on here? And so if they were to remarry, now they would have a double dowry. Oftentimes, again, that dowry includes part of the land. And so it's forbidden because it's taking away, it's double dipping in the inheritance of the land. That's why those two terms are very key there at the end of Deuteronomy 24, verse 4. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that gives you a little bit more insight in that. It's not saying by any means that divorce is okay, because Yeshua very clearly says, fix your problems. Quit focusing on why you can get divorced. Fix the marital problems. I've got some teachings on that if you're interested, called Marriage on the Rocks. We're going to go ahead and end here because we quickly ran out of time, so let's finish with the blessing over the Torah portion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chei olam nata betokenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha-Torah. Amen and amen. I pray that you got a blessing out of this. May God bless you and keep you. Shalom, everyone.